signs of any fighting. The only artillery we've heard is outgoing artillery coming from Marine guns themselves. So it appears, at least from our perspective, that the Marines are moving forward, closing in on the Baghdad area without running into major opposition at this point. And the supplies and everything this fighting force needs continues to roll right along with it, apparently not suffering any opposition from paramilitary units as well. Martin Savage, CNN, with the 1st Battalion, 7th Marines in central Iraq.
The 101st Airborne Division, meanwhile, is facing off with Iraqi paramilitary forces in Najaf. Army officers say U.S. forces avoided firing at the Gilded Tomb of Ali, a Shiite Muslim landmark where some Iraqi soldiers were holed up. CNN's Ryan Chilcote has more now on the situation in Najaf.
Grunts from the 327th Infantry 2nd Battalion, better known as No Slack, marched through a patch of palm trees, black clouds of smoke, and 69 landmines into Iraq's holy city of Najaf. The second day of an attack to root out Fedayeen paramilitaries who have used the city as a safe haven to launch attacks against U.S. forces for more than a week.
Let's go!
The goal, to deny the Fedayeen's movement.
We had a family of 6 inside the second unlocked door over.
While causing minimal disruption to the largely pro-American Shia population and its religious sites.
Searching house to house, street to street is slow, tedious, and dangerous work. If it comes to this in Baghdad, things could take a very long time.
But first, some of the cities on the way to Baghdad, like this one, will have to be secured.
You ready?
Teams of 4 moved with painstaking procedure a dozen blocks deep into the heart of Najaf. Sergeant Michael Bowers from Virginia sharing my take on the day.
What do you think about this door-to-door, street-to-street stuff? Long and tedious.
No Slack took no casualties and no return fire. They did see a lot of visibly pleased locals, though. Many of the Fedayeen, they were told, fled north to Baghdad. Still, they could come back, and there's no telling how many of them are still at large. Ryan Chilcote, CNN, with 101st Airborne in Najaf, Iraq.
And clearly, developments are moving fast, very fast, on the front lines of this war. Judy, back to you.
Well, Wolf, we've seen a look at the southern part of Iraq, south central. Now we want to look at northern Iraq, where government troops have abandoned a ridge near Kalak that had been the target of repeated U.S. airstrikes. CNN's Ben Wiedemann is covering the northern front. And Ben, when I last spoke with you, you were describing some retreat on the part of the Iraqis.
It's just that, as you said, Judy, they abandoned their positions on a ridge that had really been pounded by U.S. aircraft over the last 10 days. Now, basically, it was just before sunset here. We were watching down onto the ridge below us as we saw a group of people on a road which normally has no one on it at all. And we know that this road, for instance, is mined. We assumed at the time that it was Iraqi troops surrendering, but in fact it was Kurdish fighters making their way very cautiously, very slowly up the hill. They had seen over the previous few hours that there was no movement on the Iraqi positions. Sometimes you see the Iraqi soldiers walking out in the open, completely unarmed, from one bunker to another, one trench to another. Today in the afternoon, the Kurdish fighters saw nobody. So they went up there and they discovered not only had they abandoned those positions, they had moved basically 7 kilometers toward the west, toward the city of Mosul. This really without a shot being fired on the ground, although, as I did mention, those positions were fairly severely bombed over the last 10 days or so. Now, also in this area north of the city of Mosul, Iraqi forces pulled back about 13 miles. This was as a result of some fighting, actually, between the Kurds and the Iraqi army, and also after some fairly intense bombing in that area. We saw 3 Iraqi army trucks which had been hit by American missiles, completely destroyed, several Iraqi soldiers being killed in that instance. Now, also on the ground were U.S. troops. They were mostly special forces who were providing guidance to those American aircraft that were hitting the Iraqi positions. Something else we noted in this town, in one of the towns that had been freed from Iraqi control, was that the local people, who are Kurds, it must be said, were greeting the Kurdish fighters, greeting the American soldiers. There was no standoffishness about it. They clapped, they cheered. One man came up to me speaking in English, saying that they were happy to see the Iraqis going. He described Saddam Hussein as a dictator. So a whole different feel, Judy, a whole different atmosphere to what has gone on in the south, where the local population has been much more cautious.
Very quickly, any surprise on the part of the Kurdish people, Kurdish fighters, that the Iraqi presence seems to have weakened so quickly?
Well, we have been seeing, as our viewers probably have as well, how hard the American planes have been bombing those Iraqi positions. That really obviously weakened the Iraqis, shattered their morale, according to the deserters we spoke to. But we also know, we must realize at the same time, that the Iraqi forces are pulling back to more defensible positions. We know from Kurdish intelligence officials that the Iraqi forces in the north of the country, which number around 120,000, are gradually being brought around the two main cities of Kirkuk and Mosul, being built up in those cities, where obviously they have a much greater advantage in that urban environment than they do out in the open, where they're exposed to American aircraft. Judy?
All right, Ben Wiedemann reporting for us from near Kalak. Well, with that situation in the north and with coalition forces now just a short distance from Baghdad, let's turn now to Miles O'Brien at CNN Center. He's with our military analyst, retired Army Colonel Pat Lang. Miles?
Thanks very much, Judy. You know, watching Ryan Chilcote, who is embedded with the 101st Airborne, talking about that tedious and very dangerous work of door-to-door securing a particular area, calls to mind the prospect, as he pointed out, of potentially urban combat inside the city of Baghdad. Colonel Pat Lang joining us now from Washington, who has a lot of experience in Baghdad, as well as a lot of experience with the military, United States Army, Defense Intelligence Agency, among other things on his resume. Colonel, good to have you with us.
My pleasure.
All right, this prospect of door-to-door fighting in Baghdad is something that I suppose someone with a military training would be very concerned about. Would you be among them?
Oh, sure. I mean, this is a difficult place to fight a battle, but it isn't an unmanageable place. You saw what that soldier from the 101st said when he was asked what he thought of this. He thought it was rather tedious and took a long time, which was an interesting response. But, you know, first they have to break through the Republican Guard's hard shell around Baghdad, which they're doing very well. The Air Force seems to have taken them apart nicely. And I would think once they get through that, they're going to start running patrols into Baghdad, you know, fighting patrols to test the strength of the resistance at various points around the perimeter. And then if it looks soft, they'll probably go in with the forces at hand. If it looks pretty tough, they might sit down and wait and bring supplies forward and wait for the 4th Infantry Division to come up.
So what's your best sense then? I mean, what we're seeing thus far, we've seen a lot of movement as that vanguard force gets closer to Baghdad. Is what we're seeing probing right now, just trying to test those Republican Guard forces? Or is the idea to just get rid of that defense that encircles the outer part of Baghdad as best they can, deal with them before they perhaps retrench back into the city?
Well, I think you have to deal with these things sequentially. You know, the Air Force has prepared these Republican Guard divisions enough, and what you're seeing, I think, is the real deal. These, the Marines and the Army 3rd Infantry Division and the 101st, to some extent, are all going in right over the top of them against not very strong resistance, because they're either dead or they've run by now. And they're going to keep going in across that until they come up against the city and then make the kind of decision I was talking about before.
Now, as I'm talking to you right now, Colonel, we're looking at some very long, wide avenues there in Baghdad, and that is very typical of this city. Who does that favor? Of course, you mentioned earlier that the defense always has an advantage. How does the layout of this city perhaps help the defense?
Well, there are parts of the city that are the typical Middle Eastern or North African rabbit's warren of little tiny streets, but most of it is quite modern. It reminds you of San Diego or someplace like that. And especially in the western half of the city and the southeastern part of the city, there are lots of long, straight boulevards, often 4-lane, scattered 14, 20-story buildings with parks in between them and communities of things that look like ranch houses. And so, as you said, the defensive is inherently the stronger form of combat, although the offensive is the more decisive. And so all these buildings make good places to fight from, and the open places make good things for long fields of fire. So those are advantages to the defense. On the other hand, we've got all this air power which we would use in point of attack of buildings, both with fixed wing and helicopters. We've got a lot of artillery, a lot of tanks going in with the infantry, and in the end there would be no doubt whatever what the outcome would be. It's just a question of how long it took and what it would cost.
Colonel, we have just not too much time, but if I could get a quick sense from you as to how good our human intelligence assets, the U.S. human intelligence assets, are inside Baghdad right now. Do you have any sense of it?
Well, one can only guess, but I used to be in that business, and I would be willing to bet you with all the friendly Iraqis there are around from the Iraqi National Congress and Shia and things that you've got some American intelligence operatives in there working with friendly Iraqis. We probably have very good observation coverage of the streets and movements inside the city.
Colonel Pat Lang, retired U.S. Army, thank you very much for being with us. We do appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Back to you, Judy.
Well, that's fascinating, Miles, and especially when you look at the size of that city, to hear what it's going to take to get in there. It's really fascinating. Well, we are 15 minutes away, we're told now, from the start of today's White House briefing. They've moved it back a bit. When it does start, we are going to go there live. Plus, the summer-like heat wave headed for Iraq, how triple-digit temperatures could affect the action on the battlefield.
Now save 30%. Call your travel agent or 1-800-BEACHES.
Tired of playing the mortgage rate game? You know, when you hear one of those ads that promise you the moon and you call up only to find out that the points are too high and there are hidden fees attached? Well, at ditech.com, there are no games. Right now, we're offering a second mortgage with a no closing cost option. You can be pre-qualified over the telephone or online. Use the money to pay off credit cards or for home improvements, whatever you want. Do it now before the rates go up. ditech.com. Call 1-800-71-FIXED.
CNN Tonight. Health and Human Services Secretary Tommy Thompson's first interview on the SARS outbreak. With over 60 cases in the U.S. and more than 1,000 worldwide, what is being done to control its spread? On Lou Dobbs Moneyline, CNN Tonight, 6 Eastern.
A stifling heat wave is expected in Iraq by this weekend. For more on the hot forecast for the days and weeks to come, let's join meteorologist Jackie Jarris. She's in the CNN Center in Atlanta. Jackie?
Well, Wolf, temperatures are going to be gradually bumping up over the next couple of days and topping out likely by Saturday across Iraq. There's a huge ridge of high pressure which is in place across Saudi Arabia, and that's going to be driving the wind up and over Iraq. It's going to be blocking out any storm systems from moving in, and very stagnant type air mass will be in place. In high pressure systems, the air compresses, and as it compresses, it tends to heat up. So the heat will be building, and temperatures are going to be hotter by about 10 degrees as we head into the weekend. Baghdad specifically will be extremely hot with a high temperature right near 100 degrees. A little farther down to the south and west, temperatures even hotter than that, likely around 110. So that's going to be very unbearable for the troops on the ground over the next several days. We'll spell out some of the specifics for you. Starting out to the south into Kuwait City, high temperature for Thursday will be 92 degrees, high temperature of about 96 by Friday. Farther up to the north into Basra, high temperature will be 90 degrees on Thursday. The ultraviolet index, too, by the way, will be very high, about 9, and that means you can get a sunburn in only about 15 minutes to exposed skin. And as we head up to Baghdad, the high temperatures today were only into the lower 80s, 81 degrees for tomorrow, high temperature 96 degrees by Friday, and again Saturday, it's going to be pushing the triple digits. Judy, back to you.
Thanks, Jackie. We've been telling you about the rescued American prisoner of war, Jessica Lynch. Well, she is on her way at this hour. She should be arriving within the hour at Ramstein Air Base in Germany. Jessica Lynch was rescued in a daring raid by American troops on the Saddam Hospital in Nasiriyah. This Nightscope video from U.S. Central Command shows troops carrying the 19-year-old Army private to a Black Hawk helicopter. Now, 11 bodies were also recovered in the operation, and military officials are working now, they say, to identify them. In Germany, Miss Lynch will be treated for bullet wounds and for broken bones. She's reported to be in stable condition. This is a picture of her that was released after the rescue. Lynch and more than a dozen other members of her Army maintenance unit were ambushed near Nasiriyah more than a week ago. At least one of them, we know, was killed by enemy forces. 5 of them are thought to be prisoners of war. 7 are listed as missing. Meanwhile, in Palestine, West Virginia, neighbors and friends of Jessica Lynch are gathering at her family home to rejoice over what has happened. Her father, Greg, said he first thought the news of his daughter's rescue was an April Fool's joke. But his doubts, he said, quickly turned to relief. He and other family members say they never gave up hope.
That's about all we've got to hold on to is faith and hope. If we lose faith and hope and quit praying to the Lord, there's no hope. So you got to keep us soaring high.
The family's response just overwhelming. They received the call last night a little after 6, and of course Mom was ear to ear with Dad trying to figure out good or bad news, and you know, of course, good news came through, and the roof got a little higher and the door got a little looser.
When asked what he would say to his daughter right now, Mr. Lynch says that he would tell her, quote, that we love her, and the little brat caused a big stir. We now hear that Private Lynch will be arriving in Germany at 5:15 Eastern. We wanted to clarify that time. That's moved a little bit later, and we, of course, will have live coverage of the arrival. Also celebrating their freedom, 4 journalists who were detained for a week by Iraqi officials in Baghdad. Newsday reporter Matt McAllister and photographer Moises Salmon were joined at a news conference today by freelance photographers Molly Bingham and Johan Spanner. The 4 were removed from their Baghdad hotel on March the 25th, along with an American peace activist. The journalists said that they were interrogated repeatedly by Iraqi officials, but that they were never physically harmed. Bingham said that she constantly feared for her safety.
We didn't know what they were going to do with us, and as I said, they took us away individually, blindfolded. I mean, you have no idea where they're taking you or what they're going to do to you. And so, you know, absolutely, you know, every other moment of every day, it was like, you know, are they gonna kill me, or are they just gonna ask me more questions, and are the questions gonna be something I can answer, or, you know, how is this gonna come out? And I basically started to tell myself that there were parts of this I couldn't control, and there were parts of it that I could, and that I just had to focus on the things that I could do to keep myself sort of centered, basically.
Freelance photographer Molly Bingham. All the journalists said that they were never told why they were taken into custody or why they were released. And Wolf, we know that a lot of people back here in the United States were working hard to get them released.
A lot of very, very relieved people indeed. Just a reminder to our viewers out there, Judy, we're standing by next few moments to go live to the White House for that press briefing. The White House Press Secretary Ari Fleischer will be answering reporters' questions. CNN, of course, will have live coverage. In the meantime, Iraqi state television sent the message once again today that Saddam Hussein is alive and in control, including videotape that appeared to show the Iraqi president laughing with members of his cabinet. CNN's Nick Robertson is following the latest developments from his post in Jordan, that's right along the border with Iraq. Nick, talk to us about this latest videotape.
Well, Wolf, this videotape shows the president of Iraq meeting with his top ministers, Deputy Prime Minister Tariq Aziz, Vice President Taha Yassin Ramadan. It's not clear exactly when it was shot, but President Saddam Hussein was in his military uniform, and that's something he's only started wearing, it appears, since the war began. Perhaps one of the key people missing from that meeting, Qusay Saddam Hussein, the president's younger son, who is in charge not only of the military forces in the center of Iraq, but also of those Republican Guard units that are at this moment positioned between coalition forces and Baghdad at this time. We've also heard for the second straight day an announcement, a statement from President Saddam Hussein, delivered again by his information minister, this time directed towards the people in the north of Iraq, towards the Kurds, towards Jalal Talibani, one of the Kurdish leaders, warning him not to back the coalition forces. It may have been a warning to Mr. Talibani not to back the coalition, or it may also have been a warning to those forces in the north of Iraq who were opposed, the Iraqi forces who were opposed to Talibani, calling him unpatriotic for not backing Iraq, but certainly a warning to him not to support the coalition. We've also heard another statement read today by a newsreader on Iraqi television coming again from President Saddam Hussein. This particular message praising Iraq's 11th Division of the Army, praising the Ba'ath Party members who he said had defended al-Nasiriyah in the south of Iraq. Indeed, he said that victory was close at hand for the Iraqi people. And he also said that Iraq had only used 1/3 of its army at this time, saying that while they'd only used a small amount of their force, the coalition forces had come into Iraq, they'd used up everything that they had, and they still hadn't taken control of the country. Wolf?
Okay, Nick Robertson, thanks very much for that report. Nick covering the story from his listening post along the border between Iraq and Jordan. Back to you, Judy.
Of course, Wolf, every time the face of Saddam Hussein pops up on Iraqi television, we pay attention to see if it's a live picture. So far, there hasn't been one since the war got underway. Well, reporters from CNN and other Western television networks are bringing the war in Iraq into the living rooms of millions of viewers around the world. But Arab news networks also have reporters embedded with the troops. The story in our Arab Voices segment when we return.
CNN's continuing coverage of the war in Iraq. The latest on the war from the Pentagon. U.S. forces in the desert could soon call home for free.
Yeah, man, I'm out, man. We're gonna leave right now.
An update on the daring rescue of Army Private Jessica Lynch. Her journey home begins. Live coverage during our 4 o'clock hour. Stay with CNN, the most trusted name in news.
Are you ready to save $200? Gateway announces $200 off our fully featured 300S home desktop. Featuring an Intel 2.2 gigahertz processor, plus a CDRW DVD combo, a 17-inch monitor, and of course, shipping's always included. Are you ready? Call, click, or come in today for Ready Tech Go savings, only from Gateway, featuring the Intel Celeron processor.
You decided. Once again, CNN is #1. For trust and experience, Americans choose CNN as the most credible news source. More than MSNBC or Fox News. More than any network, newspaper, or magazine. CNN is the most trusted name in news.
Embedded reporters are showing people around the world the realities of war in Iraq. Those embedded reporters are working not only for the Western networks, but also for some of the Arab news channels as well. Here's CNN's Octavia Nasser with today's Arab Voices.
Now, here are the latest developments.
Much is made about how the Western media differ from their Arab counterparts when it comes to covering the war in Iraq. But truth be told, there are as many similarities as differences, similarities such as embedding. Like CNN's many journalists now embedded with various coalition forces, so too are Arab reporters. Networks such as Al Arabiya and Abu Dhabi TV provide viewers with numerous accounts from the front lines, reports of U.S. paratroopers and Kurds operating in northern Iraq, of fierce air and ground battles around Nasiriyah. That said, however, the presentation of embedded Arab reporters can vary substantially. Case in point, Al Jazeera, the most widely known Arab network. When Al Jazeera introduces its embedded journalist Amr al-Kahki, the anchor couches al-Kahki's report by noting, on air,
I would like to tell the viewers this report was censored by the American military.
By contrast, most Western networks don't agree that the rules of embedding amount to censorship. Many, like CNN, however, do readily acknowledge there are restrictions, often reminding viewers that certain field correspondents cannot give exact locations or troop movements. A difference of style, perhaps, or maybe just interpretation. With Arab Voices, I'm Octavia Nasser.
Hello, everyone. I'm Heidi Collins in the CNN newsroom. At this hour, you are looking live at Baghdad, where the coalition forces expect to face some of their toughest fighting in a defining battle. The Pentagon says 2 columns of U.S. troops are advancing on the Iraqi capital. CNN's Carl Penhall reports some elements are within 15 miles of the southern edge of Baghdad. The White House is giving a proposed airline bailout the thumbs down. The administration says the $3 billion plan passed by House and Senate committees yesterday is, quote, excessive. White House spokesman Ari Fleischer says the airline should only get help for problems resulting from the war. As a precaution against the mystery illness known as SARS, the World Health Organization has advised travelers not to visit Hong Kong or the southern Chinese province of Guangdong. At least 78 people have died of the disease worldwide. Yesterday's scare on board an airliner in California turned out to be a false alarm. The military march toward Baghdad appears to be giving stocks a boost, that is. About 30 minutes before the closing bell, the Dow is up more than 200 points. NASDAQ is also showing strong gains. The markets closed higher yesterday as well after 4 straight losing sessions. Coming up next here on CNN, is second guessing of the Pentagon's battle plan a sign of a fatal flaw or just a lot of loose talk? We'll take a look at that. And it's front page news across the globe. But what are newspapers around the world saying about the war in Iraq? We'll turn some pages. Plus, the war and the economy. It seems the markets like today's headlines out of Iraq. We'll go live to Wall Street for an eye on your money. That is a quick update of the headlines. Now back to Judy Woodruff in Washington.
Thanks, Heidi. We're waiting for 2 things at this hour. The White House press briefing. Ari Fleischer expected to take reporters' questions. That should get underway any moment now. We'll take it to you live when it does. We're also waiting for possible comments from Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld. He's been briefing senators and members of the House of Representatives at Capitol Hill today. Both of those things we're waiting for. Our coverage continues after this.